Right, everybody, welcome back again to the channel. Now, we stopped at this point where we actually have explained, what a Dockerfile is. We have tried as much as possible to explain to us the purpose of a Dockerfile, and we have been able to establish that an image is actually built from a Dockerfile, and then a running image is what we refer to as a container. Now, today, of course, we're going to still look at the different keywords that we can use in the Dockerfile. But today, we just want to build an image from this particular Dockerfile and just understand a little bit more about the importance of Docker and why it is something that is important for us to understand as DevOps engineer, as cloud engineer, as people who are building natively on the cloud. Okay, now I have three folders here. So there's Node.js, there's PHP, and there's also Python. Now we're going to be building each of these, applications, all right? And then we're going to be using that to experiment, a few things to just help us understand better the purpose of containers, right? And why it is very, very important. Okay, now, before we build an image from this file, I just wanted to establish again, or to just remind us again, that if you look at the folders that we have here, we have a Node.js, we have a PHP, and we have a Python folder. Now, if I wanted to run these three applications on my system, what would have happened is I would have to install Node on this machine, and then I also will have to install PHP as well in order to run this PHP application. And I will also have to have Python installed in order to run the application, right? I mean, that is what would have happened. So on my physical system, I would have had to have Node, PHP, and Python installed in order for me to run all these three applications. But with Docker, I don't need to have any of these programming language installed on my physical system. Right? I don't need to have them installed because I am using Docker, right? Now, let's take a deeper look, all right, at, why Docker is very, very important. Now, we have a Dockerfile, but of course, the Dockerfile is not the only thing that will do the job, right? It's not the only thing that will help run the application. Okay, because that is why we are specifying a copy command here to basically say that this server.js is the application, all right, that we want to actually execute. Okay, the only thing that we're doing here is instead of executing that same application on our local system, we are using, all right, containers to execute that. All right, now it therefore means from the last video we talked about the fact that we have to copy this server.js into the node image file system. Okay, so now if I expand this, I can click here and I can see this node application right here. Okay, and the node application is basically just going to print out hello world, right? I mean, that's just the simple thing that this application is going to print out, and it's going to print out the server time, the server utilization, and that's all it will print out. Now, if I have node on my system, I could have just navigated into this directory and then use the node on my system to basically say node start server.js, right? And that will have executed. Okay, but then if you look at this application, the application is listening on port 8080, right? So that means my application is reachable on port 8080. All right. So now if I'm to start this application locally, it therefore means that I will have to, of course, have 8080 opened up on my system in order to access this application. Right now, let's go ahead and build an image from this file and basically learn one or two things, all right, around Docker, how to start a container, all right, from an image and all of that. Now, when you want to build an image from a Docker file, what are the things that you need, all right, to have? I mean, the first thing obviously you need to have is what? A Docker file. And I must point out here that the name actually has to be Dockerfile. Right? That is more like a standard. It has to be what? Dockerfile. And then inside of that file, you define, all right, how you want your application to be executed, the dependencies that you need, the applications you need to install, whatever it is that you want to copy on your local system into the image file system, you probably have to define all of that in the Dockerfile. So the starting point is having a Docker file. All right. Now, I have to change directory into the Node.js directory. because right now I have 3 directories inside of this sample Docker file. So I have to change directory into each of them. So I'm going to come here and say cd node.js. Now I am inside of the Node.js folder. Now the next thing I want to do here is I want to build an image from this file. So how do I build an image from the file? Now, if you have been following the course, up to this point, I mean, we've talked about Linux, we've talked about a lot of things, you would understand that when you are not too familiar with a particular tool, I mean, on Linux, for example, the way to go, all right, and understand how to use the tool is to use the help, all right, option. So for example, I can come here and say docker -help, and that will show me a lot of, arguments, options, commands that I can actually use with this particular, all right, tool. So Docker help shows me that, I mean, these are some common commands. So I can do Docker run, I can do Docker exec, I can do Docker build, I can do Docker pull, I can do Docker push, Docker images, Docker login, Docker logout. All right. And then you have what you call management commands. So under management command, you have builder, you have build-x, you have compose, container, context, debug, desktop, extension, init, and I mean, a lot of things that you have here. All right, you have volume, you have SBOM, you have manifest, you have network, you have plugin, and then you have the swarm command, which is more like, container orchestration for Docker. And then you have some other commands like attach, commit, create, differentiate, event, export. I mean, we're going to look at some of these commands. Obviously, we can't look at all of the commands, but of course, we're going to look at some of them. So the reason I showed us this is that when you're trying to run something with a particular command on Linux, I mean, any tool, basically, particularly if the tool is open source, the help option is actually something that you are going to be using very often, okay? Because, I mean, even as engineers, as somebody who has been in the field for a while, right? I mean, you can't obviously put all the commands on your head, right? I can't remember every command, okay, because these tools are updating every time. I mean, every now and then there are certain commands that are deprecated, there are certain commands that have, been imputed, there are certain commands that you have to know, and of course, each of the commands, they also have their own options, right? So it is not possible for you to put all of these things on your head, right? You just have to use all those, references to basically know, okay, I want to do this, what's the command to do it, and all of that. So that's why I'm showing you all of this right here. So now how do we build an image from this file? So we have a Docker file. So what we want to do now is to build an image from the file. So how do we go about it? So we just say Docker build, that's the command, Docker build. So what are the options we can pass in? All right, now one of the options is the tag, right? You want to give your image a name. You do not want to create an image that does not have a name, so you have to pass in a tag, all right, to your image that you're creating, right? So what's the name we're going to give to this? So let's just call this, all right, node app. That's the name we want to call it. So now here I'm giving it a name, but I can also specify what you call, a version tag. So I can come and say dot, all right, or column version 1. So that means I'm saying this application is the node app. That's going to be the image name. But of course, the tag right here is what is version 1. Okay. But if I don't put any tag, you're just going to build, and the tag is going to be what? It's going to be latest. That's what we're going to have. So let's leave it like this and let's see what happens. So Docker build -t. So the T there is basically to brand, all right, the image we're trying to build with a name. So the name of the image is going to be what? Node app. So how do I tell Docker that my Docker file is in this location? So what do I do? So do I do Dockerfile like this? Is that what I'm supposed to do? No. So what I would do here is to specify dot. Okay. So what I'm doing basically is I'm saying Docker build an image from me with this name using the Docker file that is in this current working directory. Right? That is basically what the dot means. So the dot basically is instructing Docker to say that the Docker file that you're going to use to build an image with this name is in this present working directory or current working directory. Okay? And once you specify it like this, you basically just put your what? You basically press enter on your keyboard. And of course, if everything is fine, your image should start building. So you can see here that it's building the image. Of course, it will start from the very first command, which is from. So it has to pull the node image, and then inside of that node image is going to copy the server.js. The environment variable is going to be exported into that. And of course, the CMD command will also be made available, all right, pending when that image is run as a container. Now, if you look at what you have here, all right, we have the image build. So the first thing that what happened was what? It pulled the node image, the node 22 image from Docker Hub, because that image is actually a public image. And then the next thing it did is to what? Is to copy the server.js that we have here locally into the image file system. And I mean, that is all that there is. So now if I want to basically just verify what has just happened, I can come here to my Docker desktop, for example. All right, and then I can come here and click on images. And right here, if I expand this, I can actually just see my image right here. So look at the image. So the image is what? Is node app, and this is the image ID. And of course, if you look at the tag, if you look at the tag says what? Latest, because I didn't specify, all right, any particular tag. If you look at this Minikube one, you can see that this tag says version 0.0.45. That is the version of that, right? And look at the image as well. So the image, the size of that image came to 1.1 gig at the end of the day. I mean, that's quite heavy, but of course, we're going to get into how to reduce the image size and all of that, I mean, in later videos, okay? But for now, we just want to understand the basics, and then of course, we build upon that. All right, so now you can see here from my Docker desktop, I can see here that it says the image status is what? Is unused, because no container has been created yet from this particular image. So the status is what? Is unused. So which means the image is available, but of course, I have not derived, or I have not, all right, started this image. I have not run this image as a container. So no container has been started from this image. And that is why the status says what? Unused. Okay, now if you want to also check, you know, the image that you have built using the CLI, you can also do that very simply. All right, you can come here to your terminal and just say Docker. All right, just say Docker images. All right, so Docker images will also show you the image that we just built, which is the node app. The tag is what? Is latest. The image ID is right here, and it also shows us the size as 1.12 gig. Okay, now the reason I'm using Docker Desktop is to just give you something, I mean, a virtual representation of what is happening on the CLI, right? I mean, this will show you, okay, what is really going on. Okay, and of course, if I come here to builds, I can also see that my Node.js application was built. I mean, this is one of the build right here. And I can see that the build actually completed in 25 seconds. Okay, and if I click on this name, I can actually see some other information about, you know, that particular build. Okay, I can see the build start time, I can see the build end time, I can see some of these, all right, information that I have right here. Okay, so I can see all of this. So that is one of the beauty of the Docker desktop. So it gives you, I mean, some virtual representation. You can actually see what you're doing. You can actually see how your container is running and all of that. And that is why I'm using the Docker desktop and the Docker CLI to help us understand, all right, this Docker thing, you know, better. Okay, so Docker images will show you your node app. Okay, so you can see the node app that you've just built, and then of course you can see the latest tag right here. So the command for that is what? Is images. Now, as we can see from the Docker desktop, okay, the image says what? Unused, right? And you can also see the image ID right here, which corresponds to the image ID that we have right here as well. Okay, now on the Docker desktop, you can actually click on your image and just, you know, check, you know, what actually happened, you know, what, you know, when the image was built, you know, what are the things that were executed inside of that image, right? So here I can see the, you know, the yarn version. I mean, that's just a command to build a Node.js application when you want to, you know, when you want to run your package.json and you want to build the dependencies in Node.js, you can use yarn or you can use npm, okay? But that is just by the way. So this is what was copied inside, and this is the environment variable, I mean, that we specified, right? So you can actually see the layers in that image using the Docker desktop, okay? It gives you that opportunity. Now, we have built an image from this application, okay? So the next question is, how do I start a container from this image, right? How do I start a container? Now, from the application itself, it tells us that this application is listening on port 8080. That means this particular port has been bundled inside of the image. So when you want to start your image, you must be conscious that your image is running on what? On port 8080. So how do we go about that? Now, let me clear my screen. So here, I can come here now and say, all right, Docker, all right, and then you use the run command. So Docker run is actually the command. So Docker run basically means you want to run an image as a container, right? That is what it means basically. Okay. But before you do Docker run, you must do Docker images. Just to check the image that you want to run. Okay. So the image I want to run is what? Is node app, and the tag is what? Is the latest. Okay. So now I would Docker run. So what are the options? So of course I can do -help. So basically check the options I can use. So if you look at it here, you can see, a number of options actually. And of course, we cannot go through all of the options, but I'll walk you through some of them that I think, all right, are important. Okay. So here I will say Docker run, okay, -d. Now, what is the purpose of -d? -d here basically means I want to run this particular image as a container, but I want to run it in the background, which means I don't want my screen to be populated, all right, with events that are happening as I'm running the image, okay? I just want it to run in the background, just output for me the container ID. That's all I need, right? I don't want to, basically just see anything. I don't want to see any log on my terminal, okay? That is what -d basically means. So if you look at the options here, all right, you can actually just, look at that. So the -d means what? Detach, which means run container in what? In the background and print container ID. So that is what -d basically means. Okay. So container will run in the background. Now, this application is a web application. So it listens on port 8080. So that means we have to open up port 8080, right? Now, when you're running containers, there's what you call the container port and there's what you call the host port. All right. And there has to be a mapping between the host port and the container port. All right. So the way you specify the host port and the container port mapping is to use what you call -p. All right. So if we come here again and look at the options that we have, all right, we can see -p here. So publish list. So -p, this one means publish a container port to the host. And this other one, the capital one, means publish all exposed ports, all right, to random port. So the first one we're using is what? -p, which is the small letter. Okay, publish a container port to the host port, right? So that's what we're using. So what is going to be the host port? Now, the host port can be any port on your system that has not been used. Okay, any port on your system that has not what? That has not been used. Okay, so port 80, if it's available on your system, you can use that, right? Now, the host port does not have to be the same as the container port. All right, let's get that. The host port does not have to be what? The same as the container port. So even though my application is listening on port 8080, which is going to be the container port, it does not mean that on the host side, I have to also open up port 8080. There's no such rule. Okay, so which means my host ports can be 8000, it can be 80, it can be 8001, it can be 81. It can be any port. The only condition is that that port must not have been used by any other, all right, application or service on your system. That is the only rule. Okay, so here I can say my host port is, for example, let's say 81. All right, for example, that is what I want to use as my host port. So that means on my host system, I am opening up port 81 to connect to what? Port 8080, which is the container port. All right, so port 81 on my system, I'm opening that up to connect to what? Port 8080, all right, of the port of my container. And of course, you can put a space in between. It doesn't have to be together. All right, so -p 81. So the host side is 81. So on my system, port 81 is going to be opened up. And of course, once that port is opened up, there's no other service or application that can use that port again because it has been what? Taken. So container port is what? 8080. Now, what are the other things that we can also do here? Right? What are the other things? But of course, there are a lot of other options you can pass here. You can pass in the volume that you want to use. You can pass in, a lot, more options. Okay. But we're not going to go into that. We just want to run an image simply to just understand a few things. So now the next thing that you would do, which is sometimes also the last thing that you specify, is the name of the image. And the way to specify the image is just to put the image name and nothing more. So here I will say node app : latest. Now, the reason why I'm specifying node app with the tag is that I want to let Docker know that the image that I want to run is actually available locally. As a matter of fact, when you want to run any image at all, what Docker does is that it checks locally first. to find out if you have an image by that name. It is until an image by that name is not found locally that Docker goes to Docker Hub to pull, all right, an image from there. Okay, so here Docker is going to look locally, and if there's an image with this particular name, it is just going to run, all right, this image as a container using the locally available image. Okay, so I'm going to come here and press enter, and of course you can see what we have. Because we specified docker run -d, which is run in a detached mode and print the container ID for us. I mean, that was exactly what it did. So what we have here is just the container ID and nothing more. We don't have any log on our screen. We don't have anything like that. Okay, and of course the node app latest is an image that is available locally, so Docker will not bother, all right, fetching any image from Docker Hub. Okay, now if I do docker ps, which is a command in Docker to check running containers, right? So docker ps is a command to check what? Running containers. So if I press enter, I can see right here that I have my container ID and I have the image, all right, that container is actually using to run. And then I have some command here, which is the entry point. We're going to get into that. And then here I have it right here. So it tells me that this particular container can be accessed, I mean, from my system anywhere on port 81. So when I access this application on port 81, it basically directs that, okay, to port 8080, which is the container port. Is that okay? And of course, if you go to your Docker Hub or Docker desktop, and you click on containers, you can actually see the container right here as what? As running. Okay, and you can see here that of course it's green. So the green there means this container, all right, is working. Now look at the name that they gave this, I mean, this, container, practical, whatever. Okay, I mean, we can actually change that name. Okay, we can change it, but then we'll get into that, all right, at another time. Now you can see here that it says the container is running and the container is using what? This particular image. And of course you can see the port right here. So that means if I do HTTP localhost 81, it's going to redirect back to what? The container port, which is 8080. And if you click on the image now, it tells you that this image is now what? In use. Initially, it told us that the image was not what? Was not used, right? But now it is what? In use, because we have a container that has been derived from this particular, all right, image. Okay, so let's click on this and let's basically open up our, all right, application. So I'm going to come here, all right, and I'm going to come here. I'm going to say localhost, all right, and that is going to be 81, right? And I'm going to press enter. And right now I can see that it says what? Hello world, all right, from my container. So what happened is what? Port 81 directed back to what? Port 8080. Is that okay? I hope we're learning something. Now, the beauty of it also is you can also log. Okay, you can check the logs of your container, particularly if the container is still running. So here, I can do Docker logs, okay, Docker logs, and I can grab the container ID right here, paste it here, and then I press enter. Right, of course, it's not showing me, all right, any logs. But there are certain applications that when you click on, when you put the Docker logs like that and the container ID, it basically shows you, all right, the events that are happening right here. And of course, if you're using Docker desktop as well, you can also click on, all right, that particular container. And if there's any log, it shows you the information here. But of course, as you can see, our container is not outputting any log. So I'm going to stop here. And then in the next video, we're going to run the other applications and I'm going to show you something even, all right, more interesting. Okay. So thank you. And I'll see you on the next one.